Hello, my name's Elijah Wells and today's review is Josh Safdie's new movie, Marty Supreme. The movie follows Marty Mauser, who's portrayed by Timothy Chalamet in the movie, who plays a desperate yet optimistic table tennis player who follows his dreams to become essentially the top of his game and being recognised by the table tennis elites in the early 1950s. But however, this will come out across that he's basically alienating the people around him, and he has, we'll just say, some loose ends with other people that gets that'll pretty much bite him in the ass eventually. A couple of months ago, I did see a film from his brother, being Benny Safdie, which is the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson led feature, being The Smashing Machine, where he plays Mark Kerr as a UFC fighter. I definitely really liked this movie, as it definitely did show Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson pretty much way outside of his own comfort zone as a more vulnerable and somewhat more mentally and emotionally tormented UFC fighter who's having all sorts of struggles that pretty much play around him. In the movie, of course, is definitely one of these, surprisingly one of the best performances to come out so far this year. Unfortunately, it did really poorly in the box office, which is a real darn shame. But I definitely hope that Dwayne Johnson doesn't get put off by this, and hopefully does more of these more dramatic roles as opposed to more action-filled films. But the reason I bring this up, this is the of course, being directed by his brother, this movie, Josh Safdie, but it's also in the case that this is basically two sports movies that, of course, got a lot of acclaim recently. So, what really did catch my attention is people were hyping up My Supreme as being the better version of this movie, a better version of Smashing Machine, as it's basically a Safdie directed sports biopic. So, which does get me a little bit more interested, like, okay, if Smashing Machine was really good, then what does this movie have in store? And already the critical hype of My Supreme was already getting through the roof at a point when even someone on Twitter, that I even reposted one of their tweets, being that comparing this film along with Sinners and One Battle After Another to films of 1967 like Bonnie and Clyde and In the Heat of the Night and Graduate, as these three movies are pretty much so good and so possibly so consequential that it ushers in a new era of Hollywood, like the new Hollywood era, which is a more director-driven, more auteur-driven cinema that goes away from the Code era cinema and pretty much shows cinema as more of a director's vision, pretty much fully at play. Which again, we may have to wait for a couple of years to see how that plays out, but it's definitely a very interesting theory to posit in this year's films that came out. But also looking at this film, of course, the reception of this is pretty much rapturous. So, would you say, does it live up to the hype? What really surprised me coming into this movie is that the film soundtrack is bizarrely from a lot of synth music, a lot of new wave music, which is found like, okay, this movie is set in the 50s, yet it's music that wouldn't become popular until 30 years later, which is, again, a little bit surprising. But I went to, after the film, after I finished the film, I googled it, what was the deal with the 80s music, with synths and new wave stuff in the movie set in the 50s, and it did make sense when its film's composer essentially said that the main character, Marty, being played by Timothy Chalamet, is basically a very forward-thinking person and always looks to the future, but unfortunately, as a consequence of that, he is, super out of sync and super outpaced with the characters and the environment that is around him, thus causing the alienation from everyone around him on numerous occasions in this movie. And that is somewhat of a good justification for using different era music in this movie, as the synth music and the new wave stuff, particularly in this movie, is incredible. I really do dig that soundtrack. Particularly, the movie does end with the song "Tears for Fears," "Everybody Wants to Rule the World," which is again a really good song to end, regardless of the movie. And of course, again, the music in this movie is again incredible in my opinion, from the table tennis playing, and even when Marty escapes from his apartment away from the police officers and all that. The music is just incredible in my opinion. I just really liked how they did that music, with the justification about using that he's a forward-thinking person, but he goes in his own way that pretty much alienates the people around him. what really definitely sells this movie for me is definitely the character development of Marty being portrayed by Timothy Chalamet. Like I said, like when like in the beginning of the film, he's basically this vulgar, immature, downright cocky player who pretty much makes jokes about World War II and being a Jewish person post World War II, and saying that in front of journalists, and also making jokes about the Hiroshima nuclear attack, and of course the Japan, again all after World War II, which again I did see someone on Twitter saying, or I mean on Letterboxd, saying that someone making jokes about Japan, World War II, and being Jewish post World War II, it's like someone making jokes about September 11 in 2002. Like, it does. He does somewhat come off this brash and somewhat of a gross person when it comes to his humor, but it does counter out, particularly near the end of the film, where he's pretty much doing a lot of more hustling gigs to get money to go to a tournament in Japan, which eventually didn't go his way for all sorts of reasons, and he's pretty much doing a lot of things out of desperation, like by accident making his character's life a living hell or just completely ruined beyond belief. And of course, accidentally getting entangled with some pretty messed up people like the Mafia, which again is pretty much the cocky person who doesn't know any better like what he's doing, but by the end of the movie, he's pretty much the walls are closing in, and he's pretty much realised the absolute dread of his own situation that he's created himself in, and what he threw his all of his supporting characters into. And there's loads of very bizarre yet interesting supporting characters in the movie, like Kay Stone being betrayed by Gwyneth Paltrow, who's basically this wealthy retired actress who's plotting a comeback in the theatre scene, and pretty much has an affair with Marty throughout the movie, and pretty much go off, and of course they have really good chemistry with each other, and definitely Gwyneth Paltrow as basically a more broken down, much more vulnerable person who's been away from the spotlight for such a long time. That pretty much somewhat takes a toll on her, which is again a very interesting take on retired actors, like say like Persona, or maybe Sunset Boulevard, with the classical movies about a long past her prime actress, which is again some interesting stuff. And there's also Rachel, who's I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, being Odessa Azion, who's basically a childhood friend of Marty that Marty has an affair with, and throughout the entire movie gets him pregnant in the movie, which is again pretty much one of the more bizarre characters in this movie, like getting into a fight, and of course being put up with a lot of hustling gigs that Marty has to go through in order to get out of his desperate ways to fund his way into Japan, which is again a very prevalent plotline in this movie. And there's Kevin O'Reilly playing Milton as a businessman, and also Kate's husband, who takes a very keen interest that he's a table tennis player, and of course Marty sarcastically mocking that he's invested in pens and works on essentially in a pen industry. Of course, there's Tyler O'Connor, or you may know him as Tyler the Creator, the R&B hip-hop artist who's known for albums like Call Me If You Get Lost, Igor, Flower Boy, and there's more recent stuff like Chromacopia and Don't Tap the Glass. Like, he's only in this movie somewhat briefly as a taxi driver and a friend of his, and he's also really good at table tennis in this movie. Again, the insults and barbs that he often throws at Marty, and even in a fun way or in a very rude and vulgar way, always just really angry at him. They're all like really funny. Like, definitely carries over that Tyler energy that you see on stage or see in the viral videos, and definitely transforms that into the big screen. Like, I definitely do hope we do see more of Tyler Creator on the big screen. Like, he's definitely a fun character to go around, and definitely has a lot of charisma that definitely shines from his live performances and his viral stuff he does. And like, he could really work well as an actor, but who may know. But I just hope Tyler Creator does follow through with it. And again, the movie's director Josh Safdie, along with his brother Benny, who, of course, even in his solo debut, he definitely has that trademark of the somewhat unlikable character who somewhat pushes people away, then realizes the consequences of his actions, like way too late, like say Uncut Gems or The Smashing Machine. Again, how he utilizes that in a more vulnerable person, particularly with My Supreme, where he's essentially a much more cocky person, like he doesn't know what he's doing, like he doesn't know any better. And realizing all of his consequences, either like too late or the literally moments where he couldn't really turn around from that decision. Again, which is a really incredible decision, directive decision that Josh took. And of course, we can talk about Benny's Satif, particularly in his performance. I mean, in his direction. Let's say in the Smashing Machine, where it's again essentially the same thing of an athlete who's pretty much pushing people away and of course getting more and more alienated about his surroundings and pretty much realizing it may have been too late to essentially fix things, which is again a really cool directorial trait that's definitely carries on from his films and of course his brother's films, even though they kind of went on separate paths a little bit this year, but definitely hoping to see more of these two in the near future, hopefully. To conclude, I feel like My Supreme is definitely a movie that I really get the hype, I really get why people love it, and of course, I really like the movie, I really love the movie as well. And although it is only like marginally better than his brother's stuff being the Smashing Machine, although it is marginally only a little bit better, which is, again, I will take that claim to my grave, I am saying that. So, of course, it's basically a companion piece of the brothers who made two movies about a miserably tormented athlete. And this one's more of a witty take on it, as it's basically a somewhat of a rookie who thinks he can make it to the big leagues and pretty much accidentally screws over a lot of people and didn't realize it until the very last minute. Like, the performances in this movie, like Gwyneth Paltrow is incredible in this movie, Timothy Chalamet is completely knocks it out of the park of this movie, and the directing and writing is also great, the editing is also good, the soundtrack, which is a very interesting juxtaposition of like 80s music with synths and new waves in the movie set in the early 50s, is definitely a very inspired choice and definitely makes a lot more sense when you put into the mindset that Marty is a person that would I say thinks way too much into the future, that it pretty much pushes people away around him, which is again a very cool choice. And of course, everything around this movie just works in a way that it's surprisingly awe-inspiring for people that when you go down, the only way is up. So for My Supreme, I'm feeling a 9 out of 10 on this one. I mean, a 9 out of 10. So, what do you think of Marty Supreme? Let me know in the comments down below, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Blue Sky and Threads. And this is Elijah Wells, and bye!